I want to walk you through how I supplement my learning Japanese with Genki. In my latest video, I talked about my journey of learning Japanese in the last 9 months. And I did mention that in my very first month, I was super apprehensive to using a textbook. I started off with other apps and YouTube videos, and I got really overwhelmed very quickly. But I gave in and bought this. And since then, it's been a great guideline for me to stick to. I want to walk you through how I supplement my learning Japanese with Genki. In my latest video, I talked about my journey of learning Japanese in the last 9 months. And I did mention that in my very first month, I was super apprehensive to using a textbook. I started off with other apps and YouTube videos, and I got really overwhelmed very quickly. But I gave in and bought this. And since then, it's been a great guideline for me to stick to. So let's walk you through how I do that. Number 1 is preparing for a lecture before I start it. So usually I add all the vocab for one lecture a few weeks before I'm actually starting on that lecture. I have this cool app called Genki. Hopefully I'll put it in the corner of this video, or my editor, Mark J, my husband. I use this very cool app called Genki where I can create kind of bespoke vocab lists that I can learn and quiz myself on. So what I do is, if I'm about to learn lecture 7, but I'm still doing my lecture 6 exercises, I'll just add the entirety of the vocab list onto my Genki study list, which means that in advance, every time I'm on a train or I'm just doing random things and I'm on my phone, I pull up the app and I quiz myself on those vocabularies essentially. So that's kind of my preparation, is just getting familiar with the words. Number 2 is starting the lecture. If I've finished my previous lecture and I've spent some of that previous time learning my vocab, the next step of starting the lecture is I grab my iPad and I open up Tokini Andy's YouTube channel and I look for that Genki lecture in his playlist. And what I do is I just put his video on my left-hand side of my iPad, and I have my notes app open on the right-hand side, and I just go through his lecture online without even opening the Genki kind of workbook. And that's how I basically go through and learn the grammar part. Once I've watched his video, I then open up my Genki workbook and I read through the grammar pages, and I make notes on any irregular vocabulary or anything that I feel like I should be remembering, and I highlight that. My next step is to practice. I basically go through the exercises, and at this point I don't actually even know every single vocab by heart, but I go through the exercises either way. And if I have to look something up or if I'm not sure, I still do it. And that's one huge thing I would have got hung up on in the past. So when I was doing lecture 1 or 2, I got really frustrated if I went through an exercise and I didn't know the sentence or the vocabulary. It really frustrated me, so I would just literally put my textbook aside and think, well, that's it, I need to learn vocab more, and then it would just delay everything. But one key thing I've learned is just do the exercises in the workbook. I think they're there to help you learn the vocabulary, and I don't think I really got that from the start. My next step, number 3, is it number 4? is supplementing my work. So I've done all the exercises, and now I go on to other kind of material to cement what I've been learning. So my first point of call is a really cool podcast called Learn Japanese with Masa Sensei. She is a Japanese teacher and is super clear when she speaks and when she explains things. So this is how I supplement my grammar part of the learning. She has so many episodes, and every episode is about, I would say, 8 to 10 minutes long, and she'll walk through, say out loud some of the vocabulary she's learning. She'll walk through that grammar point and give loads and loads of examples that I can then pause and kind of reiterate and say those words to myself and listen to that grammar point again. So for example, if we look at lecture 5 in Genki, one of the exercises or one of the grammar points is how to use adjectives in Japanese. And Masa Sensei, has quite a few, actually 3 or 4 episodes on her podcast where she talks about present negative form of I adjectives and not adjectives. So she's literally talking about the grammar points from lecture 5, but she gives more examples and she kind of really speaks to the different adjectives that she gives, and it just kind of supplements it. So I listen to that over and over again. My second point of call is a podcast called Japanese with Shun. I've mentioned this in one of my earlier videos as part of my Japanese learning toolkit. Japanese with Shun doesn't explain grammar, just kind of talks in Japanese about very kind of simple and interesting topics, but uses the Genki Volume 1 grammar only. And so they're very simple sentences, very easy to follow. He has an episode, for example, the Genki Lecture 5 episodes, My Day Today, I think. So he just kind of explains what he's been doing over the weekend and today, and uses a lot of the grammar points from that lecture in his storytelling. So that's how I practice my Japanese listening, and I'll just go through that and see what I don't, recognize, what I can't understand, and that's my comprehension practice. And my final point of call to supplement the lecture is a website called yomujp.com. On this website, you can find loads of different stories that are tagged and categorized by JLPT level. So you can find N5 stories, N4, N3, and so on. And for Genki Volume 1, I basically go onto all the N5 stories, and there are tons and tons to choose from. So usually what I'll do is I'll just randomly click on one of those and I'll try and read through that story and highlight the grammar points that I recognize are being used in that story. So in this point, usually and sometimes the stories use grammar points that I haven't worked on yet, so they feel a little bit unfamiliar, but it's fine to be exposed to that in advance, why not? What I just try and do is I read it, I try to understand as much as I can and highlight the grammar points that I have been learning so far. I would really recommend this website actually. There are tons of short stories on there and articles about all sorts of things. So once I've done all the exercises, I've listened to my podcast, read some of these articles on yomujp.com, I go back to concentrating on really understanding and knowing all the vocab. So at this point, I would expect of myself to know all the vocabulary, because what I then do as my very last and final thing to round up the lecture is I test myself. Oh, I actually hate that. But I use the workbook, the Genki workbook. I actually use that as an exam basically at the end. So I give myself a bit of a deadline and I say, okay, this Saturday, I know I've got time in the morning. I'm gonna use 40 minutes of that time and I'm gonna basically have an exam time. So I rip out the pages from this workbook for that lecture, get myself a cup of tea, so British. Get myself a cup of tea, sit down on the table, and I give myself just a little bit of time to go through those exercises and like a test. So I don't look anything up, I try not to have anything around me that would make me cheat, and then I just test myself and go through it afterwards and mark with red what I feel like I've done wrong and what I've done right, and that's kind of how I finish off the lecture, is with a little exam using the workbook. So here again, 3 takeaways that really helped me find my rhythm using a textbook. Number 1 is, if you don't know the vocab, that's okay. Still do the exercises because they're designed for you to learn the vocab as you do the exercises. That's something I really got hung up about at the start, and it really blocked me from going forward. Takeaway number 2 is, do not feel pressured at all to learn all the kanji that are presented to you in a Genki lecture workbook. So what you'll typically see in a Genki lecture on the vocabulary page is you will see the vocabulary written out in kana on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, the translation, and in the middle, you'll see how it's written out in kanji. You're not expected, and I feel like maybe that's obvious, but for me, I just wanted to be so meticulous in how I went through this that I almost set out in lecture 3 when the kanji first appeared to learn all those kanji. That took me so long. So don't learn the kanji that are kind of presented to you in the vocabulary list. And don't get hung up about it. You will constantly see those again and again, and they will cross your path eventually for learning. Really concentrate on the kanji that are at the back of your textbook, because you only really have 12 to 15 kanji to learn for each lecture. That is a very small amount, and it starts you off very, very easy. So don't feel pressure to learn all the kanji presented to you. And the third and last takeaway is supplement your lectures with everything else you can find. Podcasts, videos. I think that's a lot of fun and it's really challenging me to go beyond grammar and beyond almost like the boundaries of a textbook. I want to be able to understand someone when they're speaking to me, to hearing, listening, comprehending, and then also like being bold enough to like say it out loud when I repeat what Masa Sensei, my best friend, kind of says to me. When I repeat that out loud, it like allows me to go beyond the confines of this book. I hope you found this helpful. And if you have any other ways that you kind of use Genki or you supplement your lectures, please share them with me. I am an absolute geek for Japanese resources, if that is podcasts, articles, books, just anything. If you have anything, drop them below in the comments. I want to hear from you because I want to know more resources that I can keep kind of tagging on to my learning. And yeah, how are you finding Genki? Let me know that too. See you next week.